The superior nasal concha, and then there's the middle nasal concha, which are attached, which are parts of the ethmoid bone. This inferior nasal concha, which is more visible through the nose, is something separate. It's not attached to the ethmoid. But these two are parts of the considered parts of the ethmoid. And, not to be deterred, the ethmoid forms part of the nasal cavity down there. It forms part of the anterior cranial fossa up above, and it also forms part of the medial wall of the eye, the orbit.
Where's the perpendicular plate?
It's right exactly in the midline. So if you saw this person in half, between the colored and the white, you would be right in the perpendicular plate. Whereas just to the side of it, on the inside of the orbit, and it's easier to see when you have everything exploding. So the perpendicular, that's ethmoid right. That's ethmoid right there, and the perpendicular plate would be extending down. And on each side of the ethmoid, it is the orbital plate. So the ethmoid's a center bone's got an orbital plate on each side, which forms part of the medial border of the right orbit and the medial border of the left orbit. So we're looking at the orbit from the side. Yet another view. So the ethmoid's sort of been sawed up, the top part's been sawed away. The cribriform plates has been removed along with the crista galli. And if you look down into the ethmoid from above, you can see it's made up of all sorts of air cells, which are obviously lined with epithelium. And if you get a sinus infection, it can fill up with fluid, and you can feel this sort of aching feeling in the middle of your nose. And if you have lots of serious problems, they can go in there and grind out all this stuff, suck all the epithelium out. Yet another view of the ethmoid, lest you worry about not seeing it from every possible angle. So we've removed the ethmoid from the skull, and it's sort of looking like that one over there. We're looking at it from above. So here's the cribriform plate. There's the crista galli in the middle, the front of the anterior cranial fossa. Here are these air cells on either side here. Here's the orbital plate, the part that's forming the medial orbit of the orbit. So here's the left orbit's right there, the right orbit's right here, and extending down along the midline in the nasal cavity is the perpendicular plate. Okay, so that's the ethmoid sitting right smack in there between the eyes, in the middle of the plates in the middle of the nose. So it's right between there. If you come in from the top, this is what you see. Come in from the side, that's what you see. Looking at the front, that's what you see. And yet another view. Okay, this is looking at it from the middle of the orbit. This is what the top of your eyeball sees. Well, no, the top of your nose actually. Because here's the orbit. So this is the left orbit, the right orbit. We're looking from the bottom. There's the cribriform plate at the top going into the anterior cranial cavity up there, and then you're looking into all these air cells, and this is going to be the perpendicular plate, but you're looking at it bottom on. Okay, if you thought the ethmoid was a mess, now we're at the sphenoid. Okay, so again, we've sawed the skull exactly in half. So there's the ethmoid that we've just been talking about. This part is called the body of the sphenoid. And you notice there's a big hole in that. Just like there's a frontal sinus, there's a hole in the sinus up here, there's a hole in the middle of the body of the sphenoid. That is called the sphenoid sinus. These are the pterygoid plates. That's the pterygoid part of the ethmoid. We saw that the other day from the bottom. Right? So this is all sphenoid. Part of it forming part of the brain case, part of it forming down here behind the hard palate, and another part of it right here in the middle. Here we are from the bottom again, right? So here's the lateral pterygoid plate, medial pterygoid plate, pterygoid fossa, the hamulus, bony thing there. The part extending up on the side wall here is known as the greater wing of the sphenoid. What's this place here where the sphenoid and the frontal and the parietals and the temporals come together?
Pterion.
Okay. See? You can hold and retain this stuff for over 24 hours. This is good. Okay,
Yeah, that's
so
the
far
only
so good. Anyone remember what that hole is? Foramen. Other half. What shape is it?
Ovale.
Ovale. Good. Okay, so now we're looking at the same thing from inside the cranial cavity, right? So that part going up the side of the skull was the greater wing. Here we're seeing it from the inside. There is a lesser wing just above it, which you can't see, but there's actually a cleft between the lesser wing up on top and the greater wing down below. We'll see it in a few minutes. Okay, this part in the middle is known as the body of the sphenoid, and the pterygoid processes are down underneath. And there's that foramen ovale again. Okay, more labels. That's for fun. Okay, so here's the body. This area right here, on top of the body of the sphenoid, is known as the sella turcica, the Turkish saddle, like like you ride a camel on. Really true. Okay, so you if you have a great imagination, like these these anatomists who stayed up all night breathing formalin, and then they looked in the skull and they had to name something. This is the Turkish saddle, and this is the front part. That's where the camel rider sat. And there's the back part, known as so this part's called the dorsum celli, the back of the saddle. This is called the hypophyseal fossa, the part in the middle where the guy sat. And that's where your pituitary gland is sitting, right in that hypophyseal fossa. And then the area up front is referred to as the tuberculum celli, so it's got a little rise to it. It's got a little shape there. There's all sorts of little protuberances around here. There's a little protuberance right here on the side of the dorsum celli, known as the posterior clinoid process. Okay. Just in front of the tuberculum celli, so this is the sella turcica, there's a sulcus, and that's where the optic nerves cross. It's known as the chiasmatic sulcus. So where your right optic nerve comes out and your left optic nerve comes out and they cross. And that's called the chiasmatic sulcus. And that hole right in front of it is known as the optic canal. And that's how the optic nerve, the second cranial nerve, gets from your brain into the orbit to go into the back of the eyeball. Okay, over here on the side, there's a gap which you can't see, but we'll show you another view. There's a big gap that runs between this part, which is the lesser wing of the sphenoid, and this big part down here, which is the greater wing of the sphenoid. It separates the lesser wing from the greater wing, and it's known as the superior orbital fissure. So it's a crack, an opening that opens into the top of the orbit. And there's lots of things that go into the orbit from the brain through the superior orbital fissure. There's a little ridge out here, which is known as the anterior clinoid process. So the ridge in the back is known as the posterior clinoid process. The one in the front is known as the anterior clinoid process. Here are these grooves again for that middle meningeal artery, and there's also a vein there. And you notice if you follow these things back, they end up in the foramen spinosum, because that's where the middle meningeal artery comes from down there and goes up to supply the dura on the outside of the brain here. Here's our old friend, the foramen ovale, and right behind it's that foramen spinosum again. Up front, you can't see it, but going forward, that direction is the foramen rotundum. So this is the oval foramen, and that's the round foramen. And then back here, there's that hole right where the sphenoid runs into the temporal, and that's the old foramen lacerum, which doesn't have anything going through it. It's covered up in living humans. Okay. From the side, same stuff. Basically, here are the grooves for the middle meningeal vessels. Here's that anterior clinoid process. This is the sella turcica here. There's the anterior clinoid process. There's the dorsum celli, the part behind, the tuberculum celli, the part in front. And this whole opening here is known as the hypophyseal fossa. That hole in the middle where it's hollow is known as the sphenoid sinus. And here's the lesser wing, and then the greater wing behind it, right? And the superior orbital fissure is going to separate them, which we'll see in a minute. And then finally, where the sphenoid is essentially fused to the occipital bone right there is known as the spheno-occipital synchondrosis. So that's basically the connection between those two, the fused suture between those two. Yes, Amanda?
Can we see the sphenoid sinus on our thing?
Not unless they are sawed in half. Yes?
For the practical, do you have like sawed in half skulls?
Oh,
where
you
can
betcha.
label that? Okay. Just wanted to.
Oh yeah, and in fact, I'll bring some up so that we can have them around here. I mean, it's for better or for worse. You guys got complete skulls. Most of the, the medical students and allied health students, they get sawed up skulls and busted skulls and parts of skulls, which for some purposes are really good. But we'll bring some sawed up ones up here for Friday, and there's some parts back in there.
What was the fissure called that separates the greater wing from the lesser wing?
It's called the supraorbital fissure. Yes.
And the post-clinoid process, that's on both sides?
Yes, all these things that I pointed out, well, all of this stuff is on both sides. Obviously, the sphenoid sinus is a midline structure. You can see it in either half. Okay, yet another view. Okay, so here we are looking at the sphenoid from the front. There's that superior orbital fissure. So there's the lesser wing up there, and the greater wing, which is exposed on the outside. So this one's exposed on the outside of the skull. This one you can only see from the inside. And this has been, many people when they're hallucinating think this looks like a butterfly. Okay, so there's the superior orbital fissure again. See, there's its wings, and there's its legs dangling down, and there's its body. Okay, whatever it takes. So we're looking at it from the front. Okay, and guess what? Here's part of the orbit. So the sphenoid contributes to part of the orbit. That's probably not surprising, since I said a lot of nerves going to orbit muscles are coming through this superior orbital fissure. So this is the orbit on the front side here. This has been busted a bit, so you can see the sphenoid sinus back in there. Pterygoid canal, we haven't talked about that yet, but at the top of these, there's your medial pterygoid plate and your lateral pterygoid plate. Okay. At the top of these things, there is a hole that goes from anterior to posterior, or posterior to anterior, known as that hole is known as the pterygoid canal. You'll see it from the back. Okay, so again, there's medial and lateral pterygoid plates. Up over on the side, out here, is that foramen rotundum. That we saw it in the front, in the inside the cranial cavity, we saw foramen and rotundum. And again, it's traveling from horizontally from back to front. Okay. Okay, now here we're looking at it from the back. Okay, so this is the body of the sphenoid. What is body written on? You remember from 2 slides ago?
salad.
Nope,
The thing.
that's the dorsum cilia up there.
The salad.
Turkish salad.
No, that's the dorsum cilia up there.
Turkish salad.
No, remember the occipital bone is fused to the back of the sphenoid, and that's the spheno-occipital synchondrosis. So that's where the occipital bone sits, just below there. This is the back of the Turkish saddle. The Turkish saddle is going to be in front of that. That's the back of the saddle to keep you from falling off. Okay, here's that superior orbital fissure again, separating the lesser wing from the greater wing. So this is all inside the cranial fossa. Okay, there's that pterygoid canal I mentioned, which is going through right above the pterygoid processes. The medial pterygoid plate, lateral pterygoid plate. There's the foramen rotundum up front, right? And that's going to head in to the area behind the orbit. This is all middle cranial fossa. Remember, the lesser wing of the sphenoid separates the middle cranial fossa behind from the anterior cranial fossa up front.
So you can't see that on here, right?
What?
Because I'm like trying to look at this, trying to
No,
locate everything.
no, you would have to break it apart right there.
Okay,
And then look at it that way,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
But what you're looking at is you can see this stuff, right? So you're looking at this part. So there's the dorsum celli, so that thing right there is that thing right
Oh,
there.
okay.
That is where this bone is fused to that bone right there.
Okay.
Looking in this direction, there's the greater wing going out there and lesser wing above it right there. And there's the superior orbital fissure right
Okay.
there. Foramen rotundum down there. So if you sort of look like that, you can get that view.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, we've done with the sphenoid for the moment. Now we're moving back, right? So this was all sphenoid that we've been talking about. There's the Turkish saddle, foramen rotundum, foramen spinosum. Back here, here's a suture. This is the temporal bone again, right? There is that petrous portion from the inside, right? There's the mastoid part is down there, so that big mastoid process is right under here.